Mr. Kennedy, what is your position on Cuba? Are you willing to get rid of the blockade on day one?
Yes.
That was Democratic presidential hopeful Robert F. Kennedy Jr. speaking at a press conference in Concord, New Hampshire, early Thursday. He was responding to a question from journalist Craig Jardula.
Ending a blockade completely.
Yes. Yeah, the blockade has kept the Castro brothers in office for 60 years. And it's not good for the Cuban people, and it's not good for democracy. It's not good for the view of America anywhere in the world. And, we need to change. We need to change the policy. What we've been doing has not been working.
Yeah.
Kennedy had earlier spoken to the New Hampshire State Senate about the attempt by the Democratic National Committee to take away New Hampshire's status as the first primary state in the nation. There are efforts afoot to move that honor to South Carolina. He explained to the Senate why he thought that was happening.
I oppose the DNC's decision to evict New Hampshire from the first in nation status, which is so important, I think, to our country. It is more than a tradition. New Hampshire plays a critical role in vetting candidates for the rest of the country. In other parts of the United States, the states are content with having politicians come in with money that they've gotten from billionaires and carpet bombing the state from 30,000 feet with advertising, or staging occasionally rallies that are heavily orchestrated, where the crowds are heavily screened and they're kind of a kabuki theater of democracy. But here, politicians get real democracy. They encounter people, they have to go to the hair salons, the barber shops, the diners, the gas stations. They have to talk to the 80-year-old lady who reads the Financial Times and the Economist every week and ask them a question and a follow-up question and another follow-up question that they will never get from CNN. They will never get it from the New York Times even. And it's retail politics. And they are vetting our candidates the same way that they would vet a city council candidate for the rest of the country. And the other thing that's very important about New Hampshire is that 42% of the people in this state are registered independents. It's the highest of any state. And the importance of that right now is that those are people who are critical thinkers, they're independent thinkers, and they're able to step outside of that fixed, paralyzing iceberg of partisanship that has our country at each other's throats. They're able to look at candidates without the ideology blocking their vision and really judge the candidates on what they say and be open to new ideas that are not locked in that ideological razor grip. Right now, it's particularly important at New Hampshire that we have a real democracy and a democratic election in New Hampshire. There's so many Americans who believe that the system now is rigged, the economic system, but also the political system, that the elections are fixed. New Hampshire has the gold standard for political elections. People don't question the results. And we ought to be, the Democratic Party particularly, ought to be making this election a template for democracy to our country and to the rest of the world. And say, we're going to have a real democracy where candidates meet human beings, are questioned by them, have town halls, and deal with all of the difficulties of retail politics. And we need to show the American people that is particularly important at this time. And today, now, we have all these new surveillance technologies, we have digital currencies, AI technology, which is frightening, GPS technologies, 400,000 low-level satellites that are going to look at every square inch of the Earth every day. It has been the ambition of every totalitarian regime in history to control every aspect of human behavior. They've never been able to do it, but they can do it now. And it's so important that we counter that threat by strengthening and fortifying our democratic institutions, not weakening them. And that begins with the Bill of Rights, and it includes the New Hampshire primary. And I want to tell you, I'm going to be in this state fighting to win every vote I can in New Hampshire, Republican, Democratic, and Independent. And when I'm elected president and I'm head of the Democratic Party, I'm going to pour concrete on the notion that New Hampshire is first in the nation. Thank you very much.
At the press conference, I had an opportunity to ask him about his opposition to the war in Ukraine and how he and Donald Trump, the two leading opposition candidates to President Biden so far, have both expressed opposition to Biden's conduct of the war. The two leading insurgent candidates, you and Donald Trump, in the polls also have similar positions on the war in the Ukraine.
Well, I think we both have populist positions. And, I think when President Trump was in office, he did many of he laid the groundwork for the Ukraine war. So he walked away from the intermediate nuclear weapons treaty. He began integrating operations to create interoperability between NATO forces in the Ukraine, which the Russians said was a red line. They put the Aegis missile systems in Romania and Poland, and I think those were things that were mistakes.
For sure.
That may have avoided the war.
I'm just looking at it in terms of what it reflects about how the American people feel about the war in Ukraine.
Well, I think, listen, I think a lot of my positions are populist positions that appeal to people on the left and right. And the same was true with my dad. When my father ran in '68, he got a populist coalition. He had whites, blacks, Hispanics, and basically people who had been alienated and left out of the system. And I think there's more and more Americans who feel that way today. 4 years later, most of the white, or large numbers of those whites who had voted for my father in '68, voted not for George McGovern, but for George Wallace. So, what I learned from that is that that every movement and every nation and every individual has a darker side and a lighter side, and that the easiest thing for a politician to do is to appeal to people's greed and anger and fear and xenophobia and hatred and bigotry. But those same people can oftentimes respond to a message of idealism. And so I think, there's a lot of discontent people in this country who like Donald Trump because they're angry, and they should be angry because nobody's listening to them. And he's a guy who likes to break things. And a lot of those people feel like we want somebody, because we're angry, who is going to break things. But I think that we can also appeal to the better angels and the same people by saying we're going to create something, rather than just breaking things.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.